Welcome back. Here we are to another module, Differentiating Instruction. So there is a video on Brightspace and you can look it over, curriculum standards and how they serve English language learners. This module is a little bit about assessment and standards-based assessment, high expectations, multiple modes of assessment, and attaining and demonstrating knowledge in multiple ways. One of the best forms of assessment for an English language learner that I know of, and actually across the board, is the portfolio model. There are many different models in Brightspace for you to look over, but one thing as a teacher or a teacher in training that you should think about is your expectations determine what that student thinks that he or she should achieve. Ohio standards, something to look over here, the guidelines for Ohio standards. Be aware of these standards, the names, and just a little bit about them in terms of your TESOL endorsement, the tests that you'll take at the end of all these courses. There are 2 videos on Brightspace about differentiated instruction that are very informative and useful. To save time and not bore you to death, I'll just let you look at those videos yourself. So the 3 A's, access, acknowledge, and accommodate. We keep these 3 A's in mind when we're trying to support our students. We build a wide array of student traits to facilitate growth. We assess before to understand the background knowledge. The more you know about your student, the better off you and the student will be. We assess during the process, ongoing monitoring so that we know if we have to retest or reteach something. And we assess afterwards to see what we've done in terms of our job, in terms of getting the content and the language across, and what the student needs to know, whether she or he has gained the comprehension that was the objective for that lesson or that unit. Teaching goals. Pretty simple stuff, but at the same time profound. We need to have a respectful and caring classroom. We need to have variety and flexibility in our teaching practices. And one of the things that I foresee for you as teachers, and either working teachers now or teachers in the future, is that technology is going to make major impacts in the way that you teach. And so in terms of professional development, the best thing you can do is keep up with the trends and technology. And again, I highly recommend Brian Alexander's blog for that. There's a nice video that you can watch on Brightspace on sheltered instruction, and the PSYOP class is also about sheltered instruction. There are different kinds of sheltered instruction, so you should be cognizant of that. I'll put a chart in Brightspace either in the PSYOP class or this class for you to look at. The key points, though, of sheltered instruction is that the instruction is modified, and students have a little more preparation time to read. You set the context. This is what I call building the background, setting the context. You set the purpose by the language and content objective. You elicit prior knowledge. This is, again, you know your students well enough so that you know what they can do and what they need to learn to do, and then you elicit that knowledge from them. You're conscious of the pace and complexity of what you're teaching, and the pace also means the rate of speech at which you're speaking and the complexity of the language that you're using, not just the complexity of the content. And I always advocate checking for understanding in 2 ways. The CCQs are comprehension check questions, which we learned from the ESL techniques class, and then the ICQs, the instructional checking questions. So when planning, we consider our students and the curriculum, both of them together. And in terms of that, what that means is that I'm constantly revising my courses to try to tailor the class to meet the needs of the students that I have. And in a way that's kind of an ideal because every student is unique and different. But there's a difference between working teachers and teachers in training. There's a difference between international students in terms of the linguistic content that I prepare for them, and maybe graduate and doctoral students that have a different set of vocabulary and reading expectations. So this is something to really think about. What is the purpose of the LOCO? L-O-C-O, language objective, content objective. Well, here is the reason that what language and content objectives can do. They can help you with pre-assessment and assumptions. They can help you with your groupings. They can help you with your materials. They can help you sequence your lessons and post-assessment, and then they can help you in terms of reflecting. Did I achieve what I set out to achieve in this lesson? And how could I have achieved it even better? As a teacher, you're more than somebody who just gives information. You're somebody who also is teaching children the cultural, the communicative conventions. And along with those communicative conventions is also, for me, the way that I define it is teaching people to be cooperative and to get along with each other and to tolerate each other and to respect each other. So that's part of our job as teachers too. We're models in many different ways. So it's important to understand that it's more than just getting across the content. This is something that I find really interesting, and very few people address this problem. It is your classroom. What does your classroom look like? And in a sense, I can say, well, what does my office look like? How is my office arranged so that it reflects a really positive and productive environment for me? And as you can see, there's nature. I have nice windows. I have books. I have a workspace here. I don't know if you can see the workspace. Yeah, I have a double monitor. I think it's really important to think about that, your environment. And when we do the practicum, there'll be some exercises on classroom space. I mean, I'm not expecting you to be an architect major, but space is really an important thing. RTI, I'm sure some of you have heard of this before. 3 tiers of RTI. Dr. Vakil talks about this quite frequently, and you can Google it if you're not familiar with it. Grouping. This is part of the conventions of both the ESL Techniques class and the PSYOP class. So what I think about is the fact that traditionally when we teach, it's teacher to student, me to you. But it should go from that, direct teaching, from teacher to student to student to student, and then groups to groups, and then maybe back to the final feedback and monitoring of the teacher sort of bringing things together and evaluating stuff and going back. But the more that you can get students to interact with each other and teach each other, the research says that peer interaction, peer learning is much, 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 much more effective than any kind of learning that is done teacher to student. So think about that in terms of how you're grouping your students for learning tasks and activities. A little bit more on groups. So let me think about that for a second. Here we are. Okay. So I want you to reflect on the groups, and here's some of my ideas on grouping. Offer clear expectations for those groups, and if you need to, depending on your students, offer clear roles for the group members. Use Jigsaw for the groups. You might want to look at this teaching video. It's www.teachingchannel.org/videos/jigsaw-method if you're not familiar with the Jigsaw method. The other thing is that if you have students that don't like to be in groups, start them with a buddy system first. Be very specific in delegating the tasks, and as students become more and more familiar with working together in pairs, then you can enlarge the groups to 3s and 4s and 5s and do that slowly. Also, it's very effective to ask groups to self-evaluate. And here are the questions, you can ask. Did we stay on task? Did we accomplish what we were supposed to do? Were we tolerant, respectful, courteous to each other? And how can we do this kind of thing better next time? Maybe in terms of time management, efficiency, writing clearly, whatever. But all of those are a few ideas for you. Here's a nice chart for you. It came from your book on collaboration. Take a look at that and make sure that you read the chapter for the book. It's not a hard book. It's a very straightforward book, and I know a lot of the teachers here have already used a lot of this stuff, so it's review, but it's good review, so make sure you take a look at it. Okay. That's also in your book is that about themes and thematic instruction, and this is just common sense stuff. Scaffolding as needed. If you can vary the 4 skills, reading, writing, speaking, listening, build on the prior knowledge and make it relevant. If it's not relevant, students aren't going to pay attention. Do as much as you can collaboratively. And depending on your students, have them change partners, change tasks. Some kids need consistency and they don't like to be moved around a lot. So you're the teacher, you know what's best for your students, but these are just some suggestions from the books. And there are now the topic that I want to look at is the different kinds of literacy. I come from an international perspective, and so I think it's important to think about the fact that not everyone learns the way that students learn in classrooms. And we talk a lot about how Akron and American schools and educational systems are not well funded, and teachers are not well paid or anything. But compared to what I've seen in the rest of the world, I don't know if I've sent you the Mongolian school bus video. If you're interested in that, email me and I'll send it to you. But a lot of the world learns in very, very simple, you could call it even primitive conditions. And a lot of times learning is not even done inside a classroom space. The styles of learning and then the thinking styles as well are cultural, and they may differ. In some cultures, like this is a little madrasah, the picture, it's about recitation and memorization. And I think, the American Western system is very different from that. Here's another chart from your book that you can look over. It has to do with the different kinds of literacy, and this is quite relevant in terms of Shirley Bryce Heath, Ways with Words. So anyone who has chosen that as your book report or your book project, make sure that you Google enough articles. You don't have to read the whole books, but Google the reviews of the reviews and articles on the books, and you'll find that in certain kinds of groupings and families and identity groups, different kinds of literacy practices are used. And so incorporating them in your school teaching practice is very useful because it's familiar, and it's also pragmatically useful too. So, learning to read grocery lists is not a bad thing at all. And you can get you can change grocery lists into other kind of lists and do all kinds of things with literacy practices. Next is talking about how to get everyone to participate and how to support every student's success. This is a really tough question because, you can't please everybody all the time. You can't make everybody happy all the time. And my style of teaching may not suit all the people that are entered in all of my classes. The only thing that I can say is, in terms of getting everyone to participate, is to think about the diversity in learning styles and cultural styles in learning, and also to be very well prepared. The better prepared you are as a teacher, the better able you are to support. Different ways to support your students. There are literally now, thanks to the internet, there are thousands and thousands of graphic organizers on the internet. The concept from Vygotsky of the zone of proximal development, where you reach that sort of sweet spot where the child is challenged but not overwhelmed. You can help by having all kinds of things scaffolded, from outlines to fill in the blanks, literary scaffolds. You can have sentence frames, you can have dialogue journals, all kinds of things you can do to support your student. Maybe I'll make a Padlet for you to post on that. So here we have the graph of the gradual release of responsibility model. I know a lot of you already know this model. It's just something to think about in terms of review. If you don't know about gradual release of responsibility, I urge you to Google it. It's an important buzzword trend in the school system today. Why do we assess? We assess just as much for ourselves as teachers to make sure that what we've done, our teaching for that unit or that day, has been successful. So it's actually, by assessing our students, we're really assessing ourselves. We also assess to try to figure out if students need more language support. We over-assess for state and federal standards, and we have to prove to parents that their children are learning. So assessment is something that takes a lot of time, but is something that is absolutely necessary. And that is why, by the way, that your project in this course is about assessment. So this is our last slide, and I just wanted to tell you, show you that little Wordle and talk a little bit more about assessment. So we have formal assessment, which is standardized testing. We have informal assessment, which is teacher-made tests, observations, portfolios. When we do assessment, we have to think about two things: validity and reliability. So mainly what that's saying is your assessment assessing what you taught? You know, it must reflect what you're testing. So that's the validity part. And then the reliability is that if somebody else does the same test for your students, or similar test, a replica test, will they get the same response? And that is the reliability. Norm-based tests are often against and biased against English language learners because, you know, it's culturally based. There's a lot of things in like examples and problem solving in mathematics. If it's a baseball problem and somebody who comes from Saudi Arabia has never played baseball, so I mean they don't even know what a bat is. So we have to be careful about bias. Criterion testing means, does it really fit your English language learner's needs? Performance assessment is direct observation to determine if the desired result is achieved. And then we need to know something about the English language proficiency tests that are here in the state of Ohio. And we need to know who determines when and why an English language learner is classified that way, and then when they are classified as no longer an English language learner. Who makes those decisions? When you're doing classroom assessments, be a careful and mindful observer. Document everything. Tie your assessments to your teaching standards and to your language and content standards. Allow your students to self-assess, either individually or as a group. You can give them little rubrics to fill out for themselves. As I said before, I really am a strong advocate of portfolio and alternative assessments. And I think that also when we assess, we have to really keep in mind the sociocultural and economic and linguistic backgrounds of our students to make sure that we understand, you know, the assessment itself, if it's fair, if it's doing what it's supposed to be doing for the test or the assessment at hand. So I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I look forward to our next one.